We've been speaking about the partnership which Klal Yisrael, which the Jewish people have with God. The world has an objective and a purpose. We always say, the Mishnah tells us in Pirkei Avos, in Ethics of Our Fathers, one has no choice when he's born into this existence. It's against your will. Against your will, you live. Nobody wants to take his life. As much as we would like to live longer, when Hashem chooses to take us from this world, we have no choice. We leave this world. What's the concept of kochach? Against your will, you live. We come to this existence, not that we choose to come into this existence. We find that when God created Adam, who was the most perfect of the creations, as we said, his radiance was at such an intensity that the Malachim, the angels, have mistaken his radiance for God's radiance. But the Torah tells us he put him in the Garden of Eden. What does it mean he put him? An unintelligible creature we speak about, you put it. A human being, you don't put. So Rashi always explains throughout the Torah, whenever it says you take a person, it means he persuaded him. The power of persuasion, because if you persuade a person and you give him an understanding of the value of why he should do something, you've taken him. Because choice is always when there's a question, which is the correct thing to do. But if the persuasion gives the person a level of clarity, he understands there's no choice but to do what's being suggested. That's the power of persuasion. When God took Adam, and put him in the Garden of Eden, it says, Vayikach Hashem es Adam. He persuaded him. What was the persuasion? That although there's a challenge, every upside has a downside. There's a chance of a downside. But it's worthwhile because if you succeed, what you'll achieve and accomplish, it'll be for all eternity. And all your descendants. What is the objective of his success? You bring the world to a level of perfection, you yourself, and you've utilized existence, which is the playing field. That's the location of choice. You will merit the ultimate. You'll be able to cleave to God at a level which no one could cleave to him. And God being absolute in every aspect of his being, you become part of the absolute. That was the persuasion Hashem had given Adam. And he took it. He agreed. Unfortunately, after existing a few hours, he failed. And he ate of the tree of knowledge. He destroyed the world, spiritually speaking. He took the world down to a level that it's nearly 6,000 years, which still trying to achieve that level of perfection. And the Ramchal explained, not only do we have to perfect it, we have to first correct what he destroyed, to recreate that, to rebuild it, and then bring it to a level, to bring it to perfect level. And that's really the job of the tzaddikim. The devoutly righteous, that special level, they could take it over the top. But factually, the Jews at Sinai were given that task when we agreed to accept the Torah and we became God's chosen people, Goy Kodosh. We assume that persona of Kedusha. We reflect God's presence. Now we have that ability, as Adam initially did, to bring the world to its level of perfection. And that's the objective of life. If the Jews at Sinai wouldn't have said Nasiv and Ishmael, God put the mountain over our heads and said, either you accept my Torah or the world reverts back to pre-existence. It wasn't a threat. It was not a threat. It's just a reality. God says the world was created for one objective, one purpose, to bring the world to perfection. The only way it could be brought to perfection, you have to accept my Torah, because it's only through the context of choice within Torah, only then do you bring about that level of perfection. But if you choose not, the world has no value, because if the objective is bring it to perfection and you're not able to, we're all wasting our time. So God says, if that's the case, the world reverts back to pre-existence. The Jew says, no, we buy in. Nasa b'nishma, we accept unequivocally. So when we said that, God says, now you're there. Now the world has purpose, and the world will achieve. How long it takes, only God knows, and we don't know, because it's all based on our level of achievement. If we make enough choices, right choices, it comes sooner. If we make too many bad choices, we have to go into many valleys before we're able to ascend to the peak. And we're still trying today. We haven't arrived yet. But whatever we do, whatever we function within the parameters of the Torah itself. The parameters were set by the Torah, the positive and negative commandments, and the study of Torah, which is the ultimate positive commandment. But again, the Navi says, "L'chvodi barosef." This is very important. I've created this world for my glory, for my honor. Meaning that if you go and you meet the challenge and you're willing to forego temptation for my sake, then you're worthy of that honor. You're worthy. And if you're worthy of it, then you become part of my glory. But if you fail, we have nothing in common. You have no interest in the relationship, then you're not part of that glory. So the one who makes the proper choice and he's willing to sacrifice or to make choices despite is going against the grain. Because man naturally is inclined to do not what God wants. So you have to somehow suppress it. You have to subordinate your will for his will. As it says in Pirkei Avos, that if you make your will as his will, then God will make that your will should be like his will. Meaning, if you want to really do what he wants, he'll help us. He'll give us the level of clarity to be able to achieve that ultimate success, because it doesn't come easy. You need help. We all need help. Now, it's interesting. We just read not long ago in the Torah reading about the spies. The Jews were about to go into Israel. This is the second year in the desert. And all of a sudden, they come up with this idea, before we go into the land, we want to send scouts. And God says, that did you even ask the question, you already forfeited the right to go in. Because I've told you what it is. I've proven to you who I am and what our relationship is. And if you even question it after all this, you don't deserve to go in. However, you will not appreciate why you don't deserve until I let this play out. And that's why God allowed the spies to go. 12 spies go, each one representing each one of the tribes. 10 come back with ominous reports. 2 come back with positive reports. The people buy into the 10 and they reject the 2. Yeshua and Kalev were the only 2 who they all saw everything the same, but they had a different reading on what they saw. Kalev and Yeshua's reading was, this confirms we definitely will succeed, we'll conquer, we'll destroy them. The other 10 said, no, this just confirms what we believed, that God's out to destroy us. They both saw the same thing. It was a different eye that they were interpreting it. Different lens. When did the spies come back? They came back Tisha B'Av night. It was Tisha B'Av night they came back and they gave their reports. And the Torah tells us the Jews cried and they wailed and they said, God, Moshe, God, why did you take us into this forsaken desert? To die, we and our children should die because we can't go into the land. So God says, in terms of what you've seen and what you should understand, this crying is b'chiyah shel chinam. It's a crying which has no basis for it. It's for naught. Could you imagine? I give a person $1 billion, a gift. And he says, you've complicated my life. Now that I'm a different tax bracket, I got to get myself an accountant and a lawyer and tax people. You've complicated my life. You give me $1 billion. I don't even know where to begin. God did more than that. And they said, God, you're going to destroy our lives. Here I've shown you exactly what our relationship is. And this is what you're wailing. This is what you're crying. And you're saying, I'm taking the oxygen out of your lives, that you're going to die. You're going to be actually crushed and asphyxiated. That's exactly what the Jew said. God says, you know something, because you had no reason to cry, and you did cry, on the 9th of Av, I'm going to give you what to cry about in the future. Destruction of 2 temples. Beitar, we just read recently in the Gemara in Gittin. Millions of Jews, men, women, children were slaughtered. Problems beyond. 5 tragedies took place on Tisha B'Av. If you want what to cry, I'll give you what to cry about. What does that mean? Since you cried for no reason, since the basis cry, I'll give you what to cry. Now, why was the first and second temple destroyed, basically destroyed? We deserved it should be destroyed. The first temple was because we violated the 3 cardinal sins. The second temple was because it was unwarranted hate. So that's the reason. Beitar also, each one had a reason why it was destroyed. So what do you mean? Because you cried for naught, I'll give you what to cry about. So what exactly was the measure for measure? God said like this: when you were at Sinai, I gave you a level of clarity and understanding which nobody in the history of existence understood what you understood, what you saw and what was communicated to you. They prophesied in a wake state. God opened the world, the heavens and earth, to show the Jews exactly who he is and what he's done. After all that, when you have such a level of clarity, how do you walk in broad daylight as if you're blind, God forbid? As if you're groping in the dark. You know something? I'm going to withdraw that clarity. I'm going to let you walk through this haze, through this smog, and you're going to have to feel your way through by yourselves. I will give you what to cry, the clarity that you did not appreciate and you abused. I'm going to withdraw that from you. And as a result of withdrawing that clarity, you need that extra effort that despite the lack of clarity, you have to make the right decision. And unfortunately, we didn't make the right decision. First temple, there were 3 cardinal sins. The second Beis Hamikdash, there was unwarranted hate. There was Beitar. There was a plowing under of Jerusalem. But we all deserved it. Why? Because when we should have made choices, correct choices, but it wasn't so easy. Of course it wasn't easy. Because when it was easy, you didn't behave. I should continue, make it easy for you, and you still misbehave. And this is similar to Rambam says regarding Paro. The Torah tells us the first 5 plagues in Egypt, these were revealed miracles. Paro was contentious. He turned his back on God. The ability to see clearly, or to be in a position that you have the ability to make a choice, which is what the human being is all about, that's a gift of God. So you should be meritorious that if you make the right choice. But if you abuse that privilege of choice, God says, I'm withdrawing it. Therefore, the last 5 plagues, Paro did not have choice. But why didn't he have choice? Because he forfeited that choice. He forfeited that privilege. It's like a child who misbehaves, and the father warns him, you cross the line one more time, I'm withdrawing the privilege. So what does the child do? The child has a tantrum and says to the father, you're a bad father. You've taken away my privileges. Father said, I didn't take away your privileges. You forfeited your privileges because you abused them. Paro abused the power of choice, which is a privilege, a gift of God. We had clarity after Sinai. With that clarity, we shouldn't have behaved as the spies behaved. They should have seen it clearly. To go have that level of clarity and go distort it and come back with such reports, which are a disgrace of the relationship, God says, no, from now on, it's not going to be any longer. You're not going to have that clarity any longer. And you're going to have to grope your way through the dark. And if you fail, you're fully culpable for that failing. And we're still experiencing this till today. Adam had one of a kind of clarity, but he chose to eat of the tree of knowledge, and he failed. With that level of clarity, you originally were Adam. Your classification was you have the ability to bring this world to perfection. With that level of clarity, you fail, you forfeited that right. You no longer have that privilege to bring this world to clarity. It's going to take a number of generations. Only the Avram Avinu, he was born into a pagan world. There were 20 generations from creation till Adam. from to Adam to Noah 10, Noah to Avram 10 generations. And that 20th generation, there was a human being born into this world who, despite God's lack of presence, obvious presence, he somehow came upon God and he gave his life for God. He sacrificed for God. God says, you're the man. Your progeny will be the chosen people because you already created a foundation have a capacity to appreciate who I am. Therefore, your children will be given a choice. Everything's a choice. Even Sinai was a choice. God gave us a choice. Do you want to accept my Torah or not? Not only did we not ask what it's all about, we were so enthralled and knowing God's reality. After what we saw, we don't have to ask what it's about. If you're offering it, we're taking it. And we accept it unequivocally. That's what it is. So what happened at Sinai? Adam, give you an example. Avram was given circumcision as a mitzvah. What's circumcision referred to? Bris Kodesh. It's a covenant of holiness. That's what it is. And we refer to it in the Birchas Hamazon, in the benching. After we eat bread, a bread meal, we say, Al brischo shechasamte v'sareinu. It's the covenant which is engraved in our flesh. That means a person wears an insignia. What is that? You represent whichever nation you represent. The Bris Kodesh is an insignia. Every Jew has this insignia. What's the insignia? That you're not subject to the evil as the nations of the world are subject. As we said, the foreskin represents, that's an expression of the evil of the tree of knowledge. Avram brought himself to a level of perfection, spiritually speaking. God says at the age of 99, you remove that. When you remove that, you're going to put evil at bay. You're still subject to it, but you can be able to put it at bay and you're going to be able to subordinate it. The nations of the world, because they made so many bad choices and they never addressed their spirituality, they have no relevance to this. But you and your progeny have an obligation to circumcise themselves. This is even pre-Sinai. Avram had circumcised Yitzchak. Yaakov fathered 12 tribes. These tribes are called Shiftei Koch, tribes of God. God attested to their spiritual purity, as we said. These 12 tribes, their children stood at Sinai, 600,000 men above the age of 20, with their wives and children. And when they were offered the Torah, they said, Nasiv Nishma. We had a choice, but it was within our ability to make the choice. The nations of the world, because they were so subject to that evil, and they never addressed it, they didn't have the capacity to appreciate or have any interest in what God wanted. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Deos, the laws which pertain to how a person has to behave, appropriate behavior. And he speaks about why their people, they cannot tolerate spirituality. Self-hating Jews. Why the self-hating Jews? It's not, I have a priority on this and therefore I don't do that. They despise it, they hate it with a passion. Why? So he gives an example. The Rambam was a doctor. All you guys who are on the Zoom, you may be doctors, but you don't hold up a candle to Rambam. Rambam was the ultimate physician. Yeah, that's, back with archaic medicine. With his old archaic medicine, he understood it very well. Okay. I just want to get a smile on two people's faces. Okay. So the Rambam writes, just as you have a physical ailment, when a person has a certain deficiency, you know what he does? He craves certain food items, which are not edibles, but they crave it because they have a certain deficiency in their chemistry. He says, you have people, they crave to eat clay or to eat carbon. It's not edible. When they taste sweet, it tastes bitter to them. And when they taste bitter, bitter is sweet. Why? Because there's certain malfunction in their physicality. Therefore, what they process, what they experience, what they're drawn and attracted to are inedibles. and what's has value, they don't want to go near. They see it as a negative. He says, just as there's a choli haguf, just as there's an ailment of the physicality, there's choli hanefesh. A person can have a sick soul. Your souls could be sick. And if a person who has a soul which is sick, that means it's embedded with evil. That evil doesn't allow the soul, which is spiritual, to function properly. And therefore, when anything spiritual approaches it, it rejects it with the vehemence. That's the choli hanefesh. That's the illness of the soul. People are sick. They're spiritually sick. And it's terminal. They have this terminal spiritual illness. And therefore they cannot tolerate. They cannot tolerate mitzvahs whatsoever. They hate it with a passion. And these are Jews. The non-Jew, it's understood, because they have the evil of the tree of knowledge. They were never totally severed from that evil. We were given the opportunity with the Bris Kodesh. That's the Holy Covenant. That is our key to success. That's the code word. The code to open the computer, that all these forces are available to us, and these choices are available to us. That's only the Jew, not the non-Jew. So when we exist, being circumcised, what does it say? We have a badge of honor. The badge of honor, which is the badge of God, is called the bris. We represent God's glory. But we only represent God's glory if we make the right initiatives. Could you imagine? Person is a citizen of a country. He wears the insignia of that country, and he commits acts of treason. He's treasonous. You may you may talk the talk and walk the walk, but after everything's said and done, you're a treasonous person, and you deserve to be put to death. That's what it's about. Every Jew carries the glory of God. Every Jew has relevance to bring that about. You could be God's representative. And that's why the Talmud tells us, Yisrael api shechota Yisrael, a Jew, even if God forbid he becomes an apostate, he's still a Jew. That doesn't change his reality. What the end of the day is going to be, at the day of reckoning, the way his record will be evaluated, that's a different story. But it's even more severe because since you are a Jew, how do you fail this way? The one who's not the Jew, it's understood. He has never had relevance. But if you're from the inner circle of God and you have the ability to understand, how do you not understand? And God gives everybody opportunity in a lifetime. Sometimes we gloss over it. We don't want to look at it. We don't want to pay attention, but it's there. I always tell the story many times where there's the flood and helicopters are overhead throwing out a lifeline. And the person drowns. And he says, God, I believed in you. I thought you were going to save me. He says, you fool, who do you think was throwing out those lifelines? I was throwing them out. Every person in life, there's moments you have opportunities to see it. That we don't see it, we chose to gloss over it. But after 120 years, or as many years as we have in this world, on the day of reckoning, we're going to ask God that question. God, where were you? He says, what do you mean, where was I? I was there. He just didn't open the door. Who do you think was knocking? I thought it was the Avon salesman, Avon calling. That's what I thought it was. But I said it's me. I didn't believe it was you. Or I had no interest. God, now's not the time. No, it's interesting. And I mentioned the Gemara recently, but a new insight in the Gemara. It says, it's time for Mashiach to come. It's time for real time. God said, it's time for me to reveal myself and all humanity to accept me and to recognize. It's time for the expungement of all evil, and the world's not ready for it. We're too busy. The market is booming. I'm building my mansion. I'm paying off my mortgage finally in the Hamptons. I'm here, that, what? God says, I couldn't care less what you're busy with. I'm ready. And if I'm ready, regardless, there's no such thing as you're not ready. So how does God make us ready? he installs a king, we mentioned, who decrees are more evil than Haman, Harosha, Haman, the evil one. And the pain is going to get so bad, all of a sudden, you lose interest in everything but your own survival. And then you realize, you come to your realization, it's called the wake-up call, and we wake up and we do tshuva. We do tshuva. And when we do tshuva, that is a prerequisite for Mashiach. Then Mashiach will come. That's what it's about. So the question is, what's the value of that? You know, we have a prosecutor, one of a kind of prosecutor against us. It's called Satan. Satan is the prosecutor of Jewish people. And nobody could prosecute the way he prosecutes. So if we're all meritorious, at best he could say, even though we're meritorious, did they do on the ultimate level when they acted? Did they do it with for the right reason? He has to be very picky. But if we're not there and God has to turn the screws and puts us in the vise where we can barely breathe, and we say yes, Satan says, what's this all about? They're deserving of a relationship with you. Seemingly, he could prosecute us to the nth degree. So how do we respond? Has Hashem shut down Satan? So we had mentioned a verse in Koheles where Shlomo says, Elokim yivakish nirdof. God favors the pursued. If we reach a point that Jews themselves come to a level, we hate God with a passion, God forbid. You have a certain negative feeling towards anything spiritual. So God goes and turns the screws, installs a king whose decrees are more harsh than Haman. And we have no choice. And we only say yes because the pain is too excruciating. Now, who's causing all this? Why are why are where we are? Who's the culprit? Of course, we're the culprits. But who actually seduced us? Who took us down the wrong path? Satan, the evil inclination. God's going to create a situation at the end of time. We are nirdofim. We are pursued. We have nowhere to turn. When a Jew has nowhere to turn and you come to the realization, God couldn't care why you come to the realization. Elokim yivakish nirdof. And as we said, the name of the Shalach Kodesh, Elokim is the appellation for the attribute of justice. Even Satan will agree. When you're a pursued, he accepts it. He remains silent. There's no prosecution. If you're truly a pursued, at the end of time, God says, I will make the Jews the pursuit on the nth degree. There'll be nowhere to escape, and they'll realize that. And because when they realize that, they'll realize it's only me, nobody but me. When Jews come to that level, even Satan has nothing to say. That's Elokim yivakish nirdof. And that's the end of time. It hasn't happened yet. But if it has to happen, that's the only thing that's going to bring us to that level of realization and clarity. God will bring that about. But when he does bring it about, we have nothing to worry about prosecution, because at that point, we're all pursued, and we're in a pursued state. We have a level of understanding, and even Satan, who's the basis for the prosecution of the attribute of justice, will remain silent. That's what it's all about. So it's interesting. I think somebody asked me, I think Larry asked the question, there's a negative commandment. You can't put a stumbling block before a blind man. The Talmud tells us that if a person's a Nazir, a Nazirite, and the Nazirite wants wine, and you have wine, if you offer him the wine, even though doesn't say he's necessarily going to drink it, you're not permitted to give him the wine, even if he pays for it. That's putting a stumbling block before a blind man. Because we all have vulnerabilities. So since there's a chance when you give him that wine, he may violate his Naziratehood, you're in violation of putting a stumbling before a blind man. Now, God created a Satan who's the seducer. He challenges us continuously. So why is that God put a stumbling block before a blind man? We're vulnerable to temptation. And Satan knows exactly how to tempt create that temptation. And look what the world looks like. Most people fail. So if most people fail, why isn't that God putting a stumbling block before a blind man? I'm just magnifying the question which Larry asked. I think he asked it. I give credit where credit's due. So what I answered was, we had mentioned every challenge that every one of us has, we have the ability to meet that challenge. Although we may delude ourselves as it's too much, but it's not reality. Because if it's too much, then there's no liability for the person. So every challenge God gives us, even with Satan, you have the ability to overcome it. But if a third party presents the challenge, how do you know that person has the capacity to overcome that challenge? So for God creating the setting of Satan, who's the seducer of the human being, it's not lifting evil or seeking Minchas, because you have the ability to deal with it. You're not the blind man. That's called you're closing your eyes. Because if your eyes are wide open, you can deal with it. When the third party presents that challenge, with your eyes wide open, it may be too much. So how do you have a right as a third party to create a challenge when that challenge may be a challenge where he can't meet? Therefore, the third party is in violation of putting a stumbling block before the blind man, and God is not. Because God, you just have to open your eyes to see what it is. And if you see it, you're not going to cross that line. That's the difference between God and the third party. God, when he creates the setting, he installs his king at the end of time to create a setting for us to do tshuva. God understands. It's like, you just have to peel off the layers of membrane so that healthy eye should see correctly. But when you see yourself. You'll come to realization. Unfortunately, we need this setting to bring you to that realization. Unfortunately, you need the cataract surgery to be able to see. But a person never developed the cataract, he doesn't need cataract surgery. We have all this temporary blindness. God has to strip away those layers which don't allow us to see. How do you strip it away? It's called pain. It's called all-consuming suffering. When a Jew comes to that level, all of a sudden, the sun starts shining. You know exactly where the refuge is. Where do you seek out your refuge? You go back to your roots. Our roots is God. And that's Bris Choshen Sarenu. That's when the covenant of holiness, the holy covenant, allows us to take advantage of what God gave us initially. That put us in the position we can make choices. Because if we want to see the truth, we're able to see the truth. And that's within the capacity of every Jew to be able to see it. It's our choice that we choose not to. But there's always opportunities throughout a lifetime. God is all forgiving. You miss it once and present it again, multiple times. But if you continue to choose to turn your back, ultimately, the person who closes his eyes, he's the one who's is culpable. I'll give you an example. The person gets behind the wheel of a car, and he doesn't know how to drive the car. And he understands the only way you can drive this car is you have to have some kind of lesson, some type of instruction. And he understands the potential of driving this vehicle without knowing how to drive. What level of destruction you could bring about. Life, property, everything. And he gets in the car. He says, well, I didn't know how to drive it. How could I be held accountable? What about if the person gets in the car, he knows it, and he closes his eyes, and he's going 120 miles an hour? You understand? Open your eyes and see where you're going. Well, sometimes I chose to close my eyes. You choose to close your eyes. So whatever happens, you have to be bordering on insanity. But only not because you don't appreciate what damage is. If you don't value and you're into the thrill, as long as I'm guaranteed I'm going to live, I'll get in there. I'll close my eyes. What's the downside? People dying, it's not the end of the world. God's will being desecrated, it's not the end of the world. I'll close my eyes to live the life as I choose to live my life. But they tell you there's going to be a day of reckoning. Well, I don't believe that. Look, you can believe what you want. But when you hear the music, that music, nobody is tone deaf. When that music plays, every human being is going to have that music. Ultimately, we have accountability. But how? Because you chose to gloss over many things in life which God presented it. But the Jew himself carries that badge of honor. It's called kavod. It's called kavod. We represent God's glory. That's what it's all about. And each one of us has that capacity. Each of us has a different potential within that capacity. Some people more, some people less. But whatever it is, we have a capacity to achieve God's glory and be his representative in this world. Just going to stop for a moment. Question is, how does a woman contend with the effect of the Eitz Hadas, of the tree of knowledge? Avram was given circumcision. What about the woman? How does she contend with that effect of the ingesting the evil of the Eitz Hadas? So the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, where he mentions this, what we're talking about, that the removal of the foreskin gives us a handle on evil, that we're able to reject it and control it and make the right choice. He says, what about a woman? He says, a woman, a Jewish woman, their laws, it's called laws of family purity. A woman menstruates once a month. That's the life cycle. That she's given that and she suppresses and does not cross those lines, that itself, that's how she contends with the evil, by observing those laws. She says, so why for a man, it's a one-time thing, just cut off the foreskin, and it's not even the father removes it. The child, when he becomes an adult, he's circumcised already. And he really had no choice when he was circumcised. A child, he's 8 days old. Does he have a choice whether he can or can't? The father has the obligation, he circumcises it. Only a child that becomes an adult is not circumcised, then he has the obligation to have himself circumcised as an adult. But a woman, it's ongoing. The menstrual cycle, he says, the reason is because who initiated the tree of knowledge? Chava, his wife, initiated it. For him, because he was, of course, he was liable because he had a choice, but he was so-called a victim. He was a victim of his wife's, what she offered him. Chava, who initiated it, she's the one who has an ongoing involvement to deal with the effect of the Eitz Hadas. Therefore, once a month, she has to immerse herself to relieve herself of that impurity. That impurity is a derivative of that tree of knowledge. That's the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, based on the Zohar. So, woman has family purity, and when she observes that, that's how she keeps it at bay, and she's in a position to make those choices. So, let's say a woman chooses, God forbid, to cross those lines. You know, it's almost like a Jew doesn't have himself circumcised. You have this impediment, you have this blockage. It shuts you down, it shuts down the spiritual mechanisms that exist within you. That's what the woman has. The Gemara says that a woman, she's as if she is circumcised. Because there's a discussion, is a woman qualified to do circumcision on a male? Because one opinion is that you have to be circumcised to do circumcision. So the Gemara says, so what about a woman? Is a woman qualified to be the moel, to circumcise the male child? So the Gemara says that since a woman doesn't have the foreskin, therefore she's as if she is circumcised. And therefore she's qualified to do circumcision. It's one opinion. It's cited in Shulchan Aruch. It's not really recommended a woman should be the moel, but the question, if she does it, it's a valid circumcision. Okay? Because really, see, the woman herself, also, she's not fully culpable because Adam created a fence, which he told her was the word of God, about the tree of knowledge. That's firstly. Secondly, Chava's role in life is not to be the primary person. Adam's the primary. Chava is to assist Adam in his objective of bringing about perfection. So really, he's really the decision maker. So he carries the full responsibility. Well, she gave it to me. You can tell me from today forever, she gave it to me. But you know something, you're the one who's responsible. She's here to assist you. you should have taken control and not eat it. So ultimately, Adam is really the one who's culpable. Even though he was seduced by his wife and she insisted he eats it, doesn't make a difference. So there is a certain degree of culpability on her part to a greater degree, but ultimately Adam is the one who's been affected most because you should have known better. Especially you understand the consequences and the ramifications of you eating that fruit, which is to a greater degree than what she understands. So she didn't have the foreskin, which is really an expression of that evil. Before they ate of the tree of knowledge, from time of conception to birth was instantaneous. A woman conceives, she gives birth. There's no such thing as a menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle only happened after she ate the tree of knowledge. Though it says you will give birth with pain or whatever, all that postpartum blues, all this didn't exist before. That's only a result of the evil being ingested of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. Torah tells us that what is circumcision? The foreskin has to be removed. The Torah refers to the foreskin, the word in Hebrew is orla. Orla. Orla is something that's called a covering. The covering, the membrane that covers the male organ has to be removed. When do you have an obligation to remove it? From the 8th day going forward. Before the 8th day, that foreskin is not called orla. It only takes on that level of what it represents only from the 8th day going forward. So what happens? Let's say you have a child, which Talmud discusses, who's born circumcised, meaning he has no foreskin. It happens. It says there were a number of people in the history of the Jewish people who were born without a foreskin. Who are they? Yaakov had no foreskin. Yosef had no foreskin. David had no foreskin. These people, because we're saying that Moshe had no foreskin. Because what does the foreskin represent? The evil that exists within the person. It's an expression of that evil, and therefore it has to be cut away. These people, that was only an indication of the purity of their soul. The soul was so pure, they were not touched by that. And therefore Yaakov is the father of the Jewish people. Moshe was Moshe. Yosef was the equivalent of his father, okay? So what happens if a person removes the foreskin before the 8th day? And now the 8th day comes. It's as if this person doesn't have a foreskin. If it only takes on the status of that foreskin, it has to be removed. So if it was removed prematurely, that foreskin, that person never enters into a classification of being uncircumcised. So I'll tell you the law. So the law is, if a non-Jew circumcises a Jewish child, it's not a valid circumcision. Not valid. But let's say the non-Jewish doctor circumcises the child before the 8th day. When the 8th day comes, that child is considered like a circumcised child. He doesn't have a foreskin. But years ago, when a mother stayed in the hospital for 8 days and she was only discharged after the 8th day, and very often the surgeon would actually the doctor would do the circumcision. If he wasn't a Jew, that child wasn't considered circumcised because he already was classified as a non-circumcised person, the child. That child is called Tatav Stam Bris. You have to let blood from that child. The letting of a droplet of blood is the equivalent of circumcision. But it was removed before, that child doesn't need the letting of blood. This is according to most. People are machmir and they have it afterwards, they do it. I'll tell you a story, very interesting story. The person himself shared it with me. There's a certain person who's affiliated with us, does not live in the United States. And his father is a psychiatrist. His father is a man in his mid-70s. And his father was not an observant Jew. This person lived in South America. His father was a psychiatrist. And when his children were born, he did not have them circumcised. He had 2 sons. Would not circumcise his sons because he says it's archaic, it doesn't make sense. He's not having his sons circumcised. He was circumcised because his parents were traditional. So the father was, but he did not circumcise his sons. One of the sons became a Baal Tshuva At a certain age, he was like about 20 years old, and he had himself circumcised at the age of 21, one of the sons. The other son influenced his brother, and he also became a Baal Tshuva, and he had himself circumcised also at the age of 21. He realized when an adult is circumcised, he has to be on the anesthesia when the procedure is done. Otherwise, the pain is too much. Can't. Also has to be stitched. The stitches sutured afterwards, so you have to be under anesthesia. Okay, good. Whether it's local, whatever it was. So they both were circumcised at the age of 21. One brother, he was visiting Israel with three friends from South America. They're all South Americans. And there's a rabbi. He has a yeshiva in Israel. He's a Sephardic rabbi. His name is Rav Yaakov Ades. I'm not sure if you heard of him, Norman. And his father was a great Kabbalist, and he's also a Kabbalist. And when the four boys, young men, came in, they were about 22, 23 at the time, all of a sudden, he started to look at one of the one that I'm talking about. He started to look at him. And after he spoke to them and they told him their backgrounds, and they were all Balei Tshuva, these four South Americans. He asked the one to remain behind. And it was the one who I'm talking about, who was circumcised at the age of 21. And he said to him, when you walked in, I noticed there was some kind of aura around you. One doesn't merit this kind of aura unless you did something exceptional in your life. Could you share with me? Maybe you did something. He says, I'll tell you what happened. I was circumcised at the age of 21, and the moel had an anesthesiologist there who gave me this anesthesia. And after he circumcised me, he was stitching me, the anesthesia stopped. And the mole said, you realize if I continue stitching you, I'm going to be putting that needle through living flesh. It's going to be excruciating, the pain. Do you want to just stop here and we'll do it some other time? Or do you want I should finish up? He says, finish it up. He said, the pain he underwent, to have it completed, he never had such pain in his life. So this person that told him, this Kabbalist, Rabbi Yaakov Ades, today's man in his upper 80s, maybe in his 90s, says to him, now I understand why you had that aura when you came in. That because you're willing to undergo that pain and sacrifice to be circumcised fully, that's why you merited it. And because of that, you have special potential in your spirituality, in other areas of your life, and they're going to be presented to you. Take advantage of them. That's what he said to him. That's the story about the circumcision. To be able to achieve, to have that badge of honor at all expense, at all sacrifice, he says, I'm willing. My father didn't do it when I was born. I'm doing it myself. His father ultimately became a Baal Tshuva. And being a sacrifice, he became literally a very great admirer of Rabbi Twersky. Rabbi Ram Twersky was a famous psychiatrist who dealt with he had a center for rehab, for detox.
Yeah.
And he became an adamant admirer of him and became very close friends. And today he's 100% religious, devout Jewish father. Today he's 75 years old, his father. How do we address that potential? To bring about God's glory through the Torah itself. Observing the positive commandments, not crossing the lines of the negative commandments. What do we spiritualize ourselves? That spirituality creates a connection to God. So to say, lahavdil, I mean, we say kavayochel, it's like God's blood flows in our veins. We're being transfused with God's blood, kavayochel. We're no longer that physical being. We're physical in our physical sense, but in terms of our innate value, we have another value. We become the Mamlechus Kohen Kodosh. We're the kingly priestly nation. And as we say, we quote the pasuk when we study Pirkei Avos, through you I will be glorified, God says. My children, I am glorified through you, because you carry my badge of honor. You are my representation. Even the angel, who's a spiritual being, has no choice. But the angel, what does he represent? He has the persona also of God. He carries God's glory. God uses angels to do, or his agents. A spiritual agent is called an angel, a malach. That he's able to bring about certain things is only because he carries God's glory. It's like a person is, it's very interesting. We find the Torah tells us there were 4 rivers that flowed from the Garden of Eden. One of the rivers was the Euphrates. Euphrates wasn't the greatest of all 4 rivers. It was the second greatest. But yet the Torah refers to the Euphrates, Hanor, Hagodol, and Harpras, the great Euphrates, but it's not the greatest of all the rivers. So the Gemara explains the Euphrates flows by Israel. He says, if you have a king, he's the greatest king in the world, and he has an ambassador. Another king may have an ambassador who's more qualified than this ambassador. But because the ambassador represents the greatest king, automatically he takes on a whole different dimension of value, because he is the agent, the representative of the greatest king. That the Euphrates flows by the land of Israel, which is the Holy Land, although in the physical sense, it's not the greatest, the most powerful of the rivers, but because of its level of association, its innate value has different value. Therefore, it's called the Great Euphrates. The others don't have that greatness because they don't have that association with the land of Israel, which is the Holy Land. Same idea. The Jews are great, not because we're just great, because we have that relationship with the Creator, and with the Creator who created for a purpose, and we address that purpose. Therefore, we are his spokesmen. We are his testament. We are his representation on earth. Despite what the world represents, the Jew is not that. And if the Jew lives that life as God wants him, despite all the temptations, that's the true glorification of God. Despite our temptations, we suppress that, and we're willing to give that up for the sake of God. No.